If you ask most people when artificial intelligence really took off, they'll probably say sometime in the last few years. Maybe with ChatGPT, maybe with image generators, maybe when suddenly everyone started talking about prompts, agents, and machines that could write code. But the truth is, this is not AI's first boom. Long before chatbots were writing emails and passing exams, there was another moment when people believed intelligent machines were just around the corner. Companies poured money into AI. Governments launched national projects. Startups promised a revolution. Engineers built specialized hardware just for AI. Investors got excited. Headlines got dramatic. And then it all fell apart. This is the story of the forgotten AI boom before ChatGPT, the first great age of artificial intelligence hype, the crash that followed, and the reason today's AI moment feels so familiar. To understand that earlier boom, we have to go back to the beginning. The dream of artificial intelligence is older than modern computing itself. As soon as people began building programmable machines, they started asking a bigger question. Could a machine do more than calculate? Could it reason? Could it solve problems? Could it imitate thought? By the 1950s, those questions had turned into a real research field. In 1956, a group of scientists gathered at Dartmouth College for a summer workshop. That meeting is often treated as the symbolic birth of AI. The researchers believed that aspects of intelligence could be described so precisely that a machine could simulate them. That confidence would become a recurring pattern in AI history. The early pioneers were brilliant, ambitious, and often wildly optimistic. Some thought human-level machine intelligence might be solved in a generation. They imagined programs that could prove theorems, understand language, and reason about the world. And to be fair, some early demonstrations were impressive. Programs could solve logic problems. They could play simple games. They could manipulate symbols in ways that looked surprisingly intelligent. For a while, it felt like rapid progress was inevitable. But early AI ran into a brutal problem that would haunt the field for decades. The real world is messy. It is one thing to make a machine solve a neat puzzle in a lab. It is another thing to make it deal with ambiguity, uncertainty, context, and the endless number of facts a human takes for granted. A child can look at a chair in a weird room from an odd angle and still know it is a chair. A computer struggles because the world is not a clean rule book. It is a flood of exceptions. By the 1970s, some of the earliest AI optimism had cooled. Funding tightened. Expectations fell. This period would later be called one of the AI winters. But then, something changed. Researchers stopped trying to solve all of intelligence at once. Instead, they focused on narrower problems. And that led to the first major commercial AI wave. Expert systems. Expert systems were not trying to think like a whole human being. They were built to mimic the decision-making of specialists in specific domains. A medical expert system might help identify diseases. A corporate expert system might guide a technician through troubleshooting. The logic was simple. If you can capture the knowledge of an expert as rules, then the machine can apply those rules over and over again. If this sounds limited, it was. But it also sounded practical. And practical is what turned AI from an academic dream into a corporate craze. In the late 1970s, and especially the 1980s, expert systems became the hottest thing in AI. One of the best-known examples was Mycin, a system designed to help diagnose bacterial infections and recommend antibiotics. Another famous case was XCon, used by Digital Equipment Corporation to help configure computer orders. XCon became a major success story because it appeared to save the company large amounts of money by reducing costly mistakes. That was the magic phrase everyone wanted to hear: AI that saves money. Once businesses saw that possibility, the excitement spread. Big firms built internal AI teams. Consultants sold expert system solutions. Universities trained more specialists. Software companies emerged to build the tools needed to create rule-based systems. And it wasn't just software. There was hardware hype, too. During the 1980s, special computers called Lisp machines were built specifically for AI work. The programming language, Lisp, had become strongly associated with AI research, and companies believed there was a massive future in hardware optimized for this new intelligent software economy. Entire businesses rose around the assumption that AI would be one of the defining technologies of the age. Governments got involved as well. Japan launched the famous Fifth-Generation Computer Systems Project, an ambitious national effort meant to leapfrog traditional computing and create a new era of intelligent machines. To outsiders, it looked like a technological race was beginning. If Japan was betting on AI, then the United States and Europe had to pay attention too. For a brief moment, AI looked like the future in the same way the Internet would later look like the future. And in the same way, generative AI looks like the future now. But underneath the excitement, the same old problem remained. Expert systems were powerful, but brittle. They worked well in narrow, controlled situations. The trouble began when the domain got more complex, more dynamic, or harder to describe in neat rules. Building one of these systems was labor-intensive. Engineers had to extract knowledge from human experts and translate it into large collections of if-then rules. Maintaining those rules became a nightmare. If the field changed, the system had to be updated. If rules conflicted, the system could behave strangely. If the problem moved outside its carefully defined boundaries, performance dropped fast. In other words, expert systems could look brilliant right up until the moment they met reality. And there was another issue. They didn't really learn. They mostly applied stored knowledge. That was useful. But it was a very different thing from the flexible intelligence people had imagined. The dream had been a machine that could adapt, generalize, and understand. What many companies got instead was an expensive rule engine with a lot of maintenance costs. Then the market shifted. General-purpose computers got faster and cheaper. That made expensive specialized AI hardware, like Lisp machines, much less attractive. Some AI companies had been built on assumptions that now looked shaky. Hype had outrun capability. Expectations had outrun deployment. Money that had rushed in began to rush out. And then came the collapse. By the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, much of the AI boom had deflated. Startups failed. Hardware firms disappeared. Corporate enthusiasm cooled. Projects that once sounded revolutionary were recast as overpromises. the phrase artificial intelligence itself became a problem. In some circles, people stopped using it because it sounded unserious, overhyped, even embarrassing. That is one of the most important lessons of the first AI boom. The technology didn't disappear. The branding did. Research continued. Important work went on in machine learning, statistics, pattern recognition, search, optimization, and neural networks. But in many places, people learned not to promise too much, too quickly. AI had burned them once. So why did this older boom stay in the shadow of ChatGPT? Partly because it ended badly. Winners write history, and the expert system era did not produce a clean, triumphant story. It produced useful tools, genuine research progress, and a lot of disappointment. That is harder to package into a myth. And partly because today's AI feels more magical. ChatGPT can converse. It can summarize, draft, translate, brainstorm, and imitate styles of writing in seconds. To a normal user, that feels closer to intelligence than a diagnostic rule system ever did. The gap in user experience is enormous. One you had to sell to executives. The other, ordinary people can play with in a browser. But here is the twist. Today's AI boom is not separate from that earlier one. It grew out of it. The failed ideas, the tools, the funding cycles, the lessons about hype, the institutional memory, the advances in computing power, the shift from symbolic systems to data-driven learning, all of that is part of the same long story. ChatGPT did not emerge from nowhere. It stands at the far end of decades of experiments, dead ends, breakthroughs, and revivals. The field changed because the ingredients changed. Modern AI has access to enormous datasets, huge computing power, better algorithms, and architectures that scale in ways earlier systems could not. Instead of relying mainly on handwritten rules, modern models learn patterns from vast quantities of data. That does not make them magical. It makes them different. And yet, if you zoom out, the emotional pattern looks familiar. A dramatic breakthrough. A flood of investment. Companies racing to adopt the technology. A public convinced the world is changing overnight. Predictions that swing between utopia and catastrophe. And underneath it all, the same question people asked in the 1950s. What kind of intelligence are we actually building? That question matters because every AI boom creates confusion between what the systems can do, what people hope they can do, and what marketers say they can do. In the 1980s, expert systems were often treated as a path to machine intelligence, when they were really narrow tools with sharp limitations. Today, large language models are often treated as if fluency equals understanding. That may turn out to be just as misleading in its own way. The forgotten AI boom matters because it gives us a warning label. Technology can be genuinely useful and still be surrounded by irrational expectations. A system can impress people and still fail when deployed at scale. A field can suffer a crash and still lay the groundwork for a later breakthrough. And hype cycles do not mean the technology is fake. They mean the story people tell about the technology has outrun the technology itself. So when people say AI suddenly arrived with ChatGPT, it is worth remembering the engineers in the 1980s building expert systems, the companies buying LISP machines, the national projects racing to create intelligent computers, and the investors convinced that thinking machines were almost here. They had heard this future before, and in a strange way, they were not entirely wrong. They were just early, overconfident, and trapped by the limits of the tools they had. The first AI boom did not fail because the dream was foolish. It failed because the dream was bigger than the machinery of its time. Now the machinery is better. The dream is back. And the old question returns with new force. Are we finally living through the real AI revolution? Or are we inside another version of the same cycle, only with better demos? That may be the most important lesson from the forgotten AI boom before ChatGPT. Not that intelligence machines are impossible, not that the hype is always false, but that every generation thinks it is the one standing at the finish line. And history suggests otherwise,